I'll try to keep it a bit briefer than the program outlined earlier, so that there's actually time for discussion as well. So my name is Ben Kubbinga in Dutch. I'm the lead partnerships and collaborations at Circle for about 2.5 years now. Circle Economy is a global social enterprise. We're a member-based organization. We have about 45 members now, ranging from startups to mid-caps to the larger corporates like Philips, Friesland Campina. Also going into the banking sector, for instance, ABN AMRO, Rabobank in the past, PGGM, really trying to combine all the different levers that we have in terms of companies to move towards the circular economy. And this is indeed our mission is to accelerate that transition through, exactly in those words, practical and scalable solutions. And it's very nice to see in the previous presentation there's actually a lot of overlap in terms of goals and in terms of the type of projects that we want to set up. So just a quick background in terms of where we come from in our thinking. The main problem that we see is in terms of the material flows that seem to come to an end. And Superuse Studios is definitely already looking into that as well. The main gap that has to be resolved is at the end. If we continue the way we continue now, we cannot simply. So we have to decouple our hunger for resources from economic growth. And we have to move from a linear economy where indeed all the value that is being put in terms of resources, in terms of labor, in terms of energy at the beginning is not wasted at the end. So we need to look at three main elements. We have to look at resource efficiency, we have to look at value optimization, and we have to eliminate waste. And these three elements are the basis of the circular economy. And I guess you are familiar with figures that look like this. To eliminate waste, we have to make sure that we design a process such that everything is cycled back into the system with a main emphasis not on the last circle, the outer circle in terms of recycling, where the lowest value can be obtained, but really focusing on the inner circles, really focusing on how to extend the lifetime, optimize the use of our resources and our products, and then move slowly, gradually to the outer circles. So in the end, coming to remanufacturing products like the bundles case that was mentioned, really focusing on remanufacturing, refurbishing everything we have until there's no complexity and value left that we can use, and then move to full recycling of products and our resources. How can we do that? There's 5 business models that pass by on a regular basis. I think quite familiar, some of these already. One of them is recovering and recycling. We've seen quite a few examples already. This is an example from CRS Holland, a small company that recovers cables from the bottom of our oceans and gets the copper out of it and then sells it. And there's a ginormous amount of these cables on our ocean floors. So a huge base to mine for these resources. This is very much at the end, to recover and to recycle. How to extend the lifetime of our products. Fairphone, that may be a familiar name. The smartphones that are produced in a Fairway, a startup based in the Netherlands as well. And they designed the phone in such a way that it's easy to repair, and that it's actually induced also for consumers to repair it. So really finding ways of making sure that the lifetime of these products is extended. A circular supply chain. One of the things that we have developed that is now being launched is Circle Market, an online marketplace for recycled materials. And I saw in the previous presentations that there are similar initiatives and actually overlapping initiatives. So I think this is a good discussion point for later. And Circle Market, we started here in the textiles industry, in the post-consumer area, where there's a lot of materials that need to be reused. So, circular supply chain. Product as a service, making sure that the ownership stays with the producer, which allows you to actually think of what will we do with the end of life of a product. And Bundles is a nice example who sells washings. Instead of selling a washing machine, they sell washings. So you really pay per use for the use of these washing machines, and that gives them an incentive to look at, well, they use MIRA washing machines to look at how they are produced, so that they are the lifetime is extended, the life is optimally used, and that they think of what happens at the end. And then there's thousands, meanwhile, of examples in terms of sharing platforms. Airbnb also is a good example of where you optimally use the assets that you have. And this is, I thought it would be useful to mention, is what we consider the 7 pillars of the circular economy. Once you are a company and you want to move towards circularity, then these are the 7 elements that you have to think of. And this was gathered actually by looking at everything that is currently available in terms of frameworks. You may have heard of Cradle to Cradle. You may have heard of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. You may, Cambridge has its own framework, Radboud Universiteit. There's tons of frameworks, and what we try to do here is actually start a dialogue on what is actually the common language that we should use to move towards the circular economy. And there's, if you're interested, I can send you an interesting blog that gives you the background behind these. I won't go into it right now into detail. Now, the basis of our work, we started in 2012 with a couple of companies and really thinking in flows, really thinking in systems. And these type of images you have already seen flying by, really mapping where the material flows and other flows happen to understand how the system works and how, at what points you can intervene to actually start concrete pilots. Not too much in detail here, but this is what we've been doing quite a lot. This is for Fairphone also, really seeing where do the raw materials come from, where do they go to, how are they processed, and what are the different models they use to actually sell their products. And now, following this analysis, we're also talking with them how we can actually set up more product service systems with them, or leasing construction, so that they indeed keep the ownership of their products. Also looking in, for instance, with logistics providers into seeing how they can get the phones back in the most efficient way to let them repair it or remanufacture it. So in 2 months' time, we'll be sitting, for instance, with KPN and with DHL to see how we can set up a reverse logistics scheme to really make sure that the value that is embedded in these phones is optimally used. And this is a recent example from MIRA London, a waste collector in the Netherlands, showing how this also looks at a more regional scale, where the intervention points are and what kind of pilots you can start setting up with them. Now, and this fits with the link towards cities, so more a city regional approach. And the reason why we started moving into cities is because we believe that working with mayors, working with the city council is the best way of actually creating the largest impact, because they actually know what's happening on the ground. If you work with national governments, it's too far from their bed. If you work with entrepreneurs alone, one-on-one, yes, it's nice, you can create fantastic projects, but to scale up and to create a wider impact, you need an intermediate level, and this is why cities are ideal. And this is, I guess, a common statistic as well for you, is that in the near future, 70% of our population will be living in cities. So to create this impact, it's actually well, a logical step to move towards circular cities. And this is indeed what you see in different cities. In Brussels, what we've seen with Fabric in the study commissioned by OVAM, but also in the city of Amsterdam, in Glasgow and others. They really believe in the potential of circular strategies. And what can it bring? From a city perspective, not necessarily from a tree hugging perspective. it can actually bring new jobs. It can create the clean environment that we would like to see in our cities. The air quality, so like extending our lifetime, our own lifetimes actually, not of products, but making sure that the air quality is good enough so that we don't die years earlier than we should. New and rejuvenated industries, really looking at how can we reshore the industries that are now in terms of recycling often far, far away. How can we make sure that the inner loops are created within our own region? So setting up remanufacturing industries in Europe instead of looking for the cheap labor elsewhere. And making sure in this way to be competitive. And this is why we have developed a more standardized approach that shows you where the impact areas are in the city, what circular solutions can be applied, and really moving to practical implementation instead of staying at the strategy level, really finding a way of going straight from a city level to talking to companies and making sure that the projects, and we've seen already quite a few examples, start hitting the ground. And this is the approach that we have set up for this. Let me take a little bit of water. It basically consists of 4 steps. And the first one being more important than we previously thought, being the political and economic analysis of how a city works. Because what our initial thinking was, let's start mapping the flows in the city, start seeing where the economic activity happens, and then present that to a city and say, well, this is probably the best way for you to start. But we found that that actually isn't always productive, because then at that stage you find out that the interest in a certain economic sector might simply not be present, or the funds available to start projects in such a sector might not be there. So we started with analyzing the political situation to understand where do they actually want to focus themselves, how has history looked like over the past 100 years in terms of the sector development, and where is there actually a potential to create this large impact. And then based on those 2 steps, so both the flow analysis and the political analysis go to focus areas, and then in step 3 and 4, design strategies, find strategies that can be implemented, and then make a selection of those that can be implemented on the short term together with companies. And I'll give you a couple of examples of the steps that we've taken. So this is the economic and political will, and I'm sorry it's quite small, but it basically comes down to seeing in which sectors there's a clear political interest, what's the biggest in terms of GDP are in economical sector, in economical terms, and that brings you, and together with looking at how history has looked like for instance, this is, by the way, the example from Glasgow, where there's been a very strong interest in the manufacturing industry, in the shipping industry, but also in the food and beverage industry. Now, from this analysis, we came down to 3 main focus areas. One is education, one is hospitals, and one is manufacturing. And for these specific sectors, we did this flow analysis. Instead of doing the incredibly wide flow analysis for everything, we already had a focus beforehand. And what we did then was, and this is the example from the manufacturing side of things, we looked at where do most of the flows go to, where, well, basically where are the biggest impacts in this whole system. And the lowest one at the bottom is the food and beverage industry. And you may know, you may have been to Glasgow, so that this may not surprise you too much in terms of beverages and the whiskey they produce, and the beer as well. So doing this, we saw that this is really an area that we should focus on, and we went back to the city and said, well, this is an opportunity, and they agreed. So what we did then was, well, how can we, what focus should we then take, and what kind of strategies should we develop in this food and beverage industry, and what to decide, well, that we wanted to focus on bakery, on meat and fish, and beer and spirits. The reason for this was that there was a large amount of companies actually in the database of the Chamber of Commerce with whom we worked. So to increase the chance that if we would suggest a strategy, that it would actually be taken up and not be like a one-off thing where one company would be interested in doing so. So this is where we started making, and this is kind of an industrial symbiosis map of where the opportunities lie. And the interesting thing is, you have already seen the example passing by is bread to beer as one of the opportunities that pass by. And so in such a way, we looked at different strategies, 9 in total, that could be of interest for the city to further elaborate. And we went to them, we presented these 9 and said we want to work out 4 in more detail so that we can actually start bringing together the companies. And that's what we did. So we took the bread to beer, which was definitely one of the most interesting ones. And using the Belgian or the Brussels example for this in our talks with them, and showing really where the opportunities lie for bakeries, for the beer producers, and for the bars to sell these. So an overall business case for such a strategy. And then, that's what we did for a couple of other strategies as well. And then we actually started inviting these players. So in this case, it was more about aquaponics in the city, bringing together aquaponics companies, nutrient providers, light producers, and restaurants interested in actually forming such a closed loop. And that's where we are now, and we're actually waiting for the next phase to start, really start implementing these with them. I mentioned the practical and scalable side of things. So this approach was developed to make sure that we can apply it in as many cities as possible in cooperation with local partners. And we developed a similar approach also at the regional scale. And this is what we did for North Holland, where we had a similar approach, except that this was really used or intended at first as a policy document for internal use. But the good thing is now that they are so interested that they really want basically the same approach as in Glasgow to start working with companies on the ground to implement them. So we mapped where the main clusters are of industries, what resources flow happen, what opportunities are there, and what basically the region can do to start implementing these. This is the province, flat down, with the main industries mapped, as you can see. So tourism, I'm sorry, it's in Dutch for those who don't speak Flemish or Dutch. Road infrastructure, logistics, metal production, food production, a hospital area, and the greenhouses are the major sectors in the area. And for these, we looked at in more detail at how they are distributed, how many jobs are in each of these sectors, what the age, how do you call that? The different age groups are, what the turnover is, etc., to have a better understanding of what's happening in these clusters. And then we looked at certain sectors, like in this case, the tourism cluster, to see what actually goes in and what goes out in a quite simplified version, and then highlighted the main opportunities there are in this sector. So in this case, it's the water use in hotels, the incredible amount of plastic packaging that they use, and organic waste. And for these, altogether, we started looking at how does that then present a picture if you combine these flows in the whole region to get most of the value out. And this is where we are now, and they are so enthusiastic that they really want to start talking with companies straight away to start implementing these. And this is a, well, before last slide that I wanted to show is this is really a nice example of one of the projects on the ground that we're implementing ourselves, because we really want to not only stimulate companies to do it, but also work out concrete projects with them. This is Fibersort. It started officially, I think it's 2 weeks ago, with Interreg funding, with a consortium of companies around a sorter of post-consumer textiles. So using near-infrared technology to see what kind of material it is composed of and then dumping it in the different boxes. But instead of only focusing on the technology, we brought together all the players in the chain, from collectors to those who recycle them, to those who will actually reuse the blends for new products. So this is a very exciting one, and this is exactly what we want to do, is looking at game-changing projects that we can stimulate, that are practical, and that are scalable. And this is what we're, well, the list of companies that is slowly growing. And lastly, I thought this would be interesting to mention as well. Is that we have been talking with eBay about setting up a knowledge platform around the circular economy, because there's a lot of things happening here and there around the world, but there's no common language, as I said before, and there's no one who's actually bringing together all these initiatives. So eBay gave us a grant to look into this, how we can set up this platform, and then through Philips, one of our members who introduced us to WEF, the World Economic Forum, we figured out that they already have such the basis of such a platform, but are very interested in elaborating that and also making it open source. So really making it a platform not only for companies, but also for citizens, for politicians, to understand what's going on in the circular economy and to start working out solutions, because of course we can't organize events ourselves all over the place to create an impact. So we want this to be a knowledge platform that also induces hackathons, for instance, so that the strategies that we propose in our cities program, we don't find the solutions ourselves, but we present them online and make sure that a crowd is gathered around those challenges and find solutions locally for each of those.